Human hard and software theory. Concept attributed to engineer Bucur Loredan. Preface. In a world where technology has come to imitate human intelligence, an engineer dared to reverse the perspective. If in fact man is the original model of a biological computer system, the engineer Bucur Loredan formulates for the first time the concept of theory of human hard and soft, a vision that claims that every human being is born like a new hard disk and life represents the continuous process of writing the internal software. This concept belongs entirely to the author and represents an original perspective on the relationship between biology, psychology, culture, and reality. We don't live our lives, we run our programming. Loredan. This book is the full exploration of this theory. Part 1. The Biological Foundation, Hardul. Chapter 1. The Brain as a Biological Infrastructure. The theory of human hard and soft starts from a fundamental distinction, the difference between the biological infrastructure and the informational content that is inscribed in this infrastructure. In metaphorical language, the body, and especially the brain, represents the hard, the material support that allows the functioning of the human system. The human brain is the physical substrate of information processing. It is made up of approximately 86 billion neurons interconnected by a vast network of synapses. This network is not static, it changes permanently depending on lived experiences. Modern neuroscience demonstrates that learning, emotions, trauma, and repetition of behaviors produce real changes in neural architecture. Donald Hebb formulated the principle that became famous: neurons that fire together wire together, connect with each other. This statement summarizes the idea that when two groups of neurons are activated simultaneously repeatedly, the connection between them strengthens. In terms of the theory formulated by Bucur Loredan, this means that each repeated experience writes a more stable line of code in the internal software. The biological hardware does not initially contain complex programs of social or moral behavior. However, it provides processing capacity, memory, and the possibility of adaptation. The brain is ready for programming, but not it comes with a complete value system installed. This structural openness makes possible cultural diversity, personality differences, and behavioral variations between individuals. Neuroplasticity, that is, the brain's ability to reorganize its connections, confirms this structural flexibility. Experiences are not mere passing events, they leave physical traces. Thus, soft is not an entity mystically separated from matter, but represents the functional configuration of biological hardware. In the early years of life, plasticity is maximum. The child absorbs information without critical filtering, and the environment becomes the main programmer. Family, culture, language, and social interactions determine how the neural circuits will be organized. From this point of view, each individual is the product of a history of repeated neural activations. The theory of human hard and soft does not reduce the human being to a mechanism, but proposes an explanatory model. If the hard is the biological infrastructure, then the soft represents the totality learned patterns that run on this infrastructure. Automatic Thoughts, emotional reactions, food preferences, fears, and aspirations are the result of networks consolidated over time. A simple example is hunger. The biological level. The heart sends chemical signals when the body needs energy. But the way the individual responds to this signal is influenced by the soft eating habits, culinary culture, memories associated with food. Thus, the final behavior is the result of collaboration between the biological infrastructure and the accumulated programming.The. Same logic, fear can be biologically triggered by a threatening stimulus, but its intensity and interpretation depend on previous experiences. A person who has been repeatedly exposed to a certain type of danger will have neural circuits more sensitive to that stimulus. The software thus becomes a filter of reality. The brain does not only record cognitive information but also emotional information. Emotions play an essential role in memory consolidation. Emotionally charged events are stored more strongly, becoming points of reference in the subsequent decision-making algorithm. From this perspective, trauma can be interpreted as an intensely consolidated code that influences future reactions. The theory proposed by Bucur Loredan claims that personal identity is the result of the dynamic interaction between hard and soft. DNA provides predispositions, but experience writes the concrete scenario. Therefore, two brothers raised in different environments can develop radically distinct personalities, although they share a part of the genetic infrastructure. Another central element is the idea that most mental processes are automatic. The internal software is constantly running scripts formed in the past. When we think we are choosing spontaneously, we are often activating already consolidated patterns. This observation does not eliminate freedom but redefines it. Freedom occurs when we become aware of the code running inside us. In this sense, consciousness can be seen as a monitoring interface. It allows the observation of internal processes, but does not fully control them. To modify the software, it is necessary to deliberately repeat new experiences so as to create alternative neural connections. The human hard and soft theory also proposes a parallel with the development of artificial intelligence. Modern AI systems are trained on large volumes of data, and their performance depends on the quality of this data. Similarly, man is trained by his environment. If the initial data contains violence, lies, or insecurity, the resulting software will reflect these elements. This perspective explains why two people can perceive the same situation differently. Each interprets reality through the prism of his programming. Perceived reality is thus an internal construction based on the history of neural activations. A child raised in a criminal environment may internalize deviant behaviors as normal because his software is written based on repeated observation. In the absence of alternative patterns, the code becomes stable. In contrast, a child raised in an environment that academic will develop patterns associated with discipline and intellectual competition. The encounter between two such different softs can generate conflict. Each individual defends his reality as the truth. Change only occurs when one party is willing to reevaluate his programming and accept new experiences powerful enough to alter existing connections. In conclusion, Human hard and soft theory provides an integrative framework for understanding human behavior. It states that biological hardware provides the infrastructure and potential. Soft is written through experience, culture, and relationships. Most reactions are automatic, the result of inner code. Consciousness allows partial rewriting of programming. Perceived reality is the product of the interaction of hard and soft. This theory does not deny the spiritual or existential complexity of man, but provides an operational metaphor for understanding how identity is formed and how it can be transformed. In essence, the central message remains the same: we do not live our lives purely random. We run our programming until we become aware of it and choose to rewrite it. Chapter 2: Neuroplasticity. Continuous rewriting of human software. Within the human hard and soft theory, neuroplasticity represents one of the fundamental pillars that support the central idea of the concept. The inner soft is not fixed but can be rewritten throughout life. If in the previous chapter we defined the hard as the biological infrastructure of the human system, in this chapter we analyze the mechanism by which this infrastructure adapts and reorganizes itself according to experience. For centuries it was believed that the structure of the brain is rigid after childhood and that once matured the nervous system can no longer undergo major changes. However, this concept has been refuted by modern research in neuroscience. One of the pioneers who experimentally demonstrated the flexibility of the brain is Michael Merzenich, whose studies showed that cortical reorganization takes place throughout life. Merzenich demonstrated that when an area of the brain is repeatedly stimulated, it can increase its cortical representation. Conversely, lack of use can lead to a decrease in this representations. In other words, the brain shapes itself according to use. This discovery provides biological basis for the idea that human software is a dynamic system capable of updating. In terms of the human hard and soft theory, neuroplasticity is the mechanism by which software is written and rewritten. Each repeated experience strengthens certain neural connections, consolidating behavioral patterns. When we learn a new language, when we practice a musical instrument, or when we repeat a certain type of emotional reaction, we don't just accumulate abstract information, we physically remodel the architecture of the brain. Plasticity is not limited to childhood. Although in the first years of life neural flexibility is maximum, research shows that even at old ages the brain retains its ability to reorganize. This fact radically changes the perspective on human development. If the software can be changed at any age, then identity is not a fixed entity but a continuous process. Neuroplasticity works through several mechanisms. One of them is synaptic strengthening, a process by which the connections between neurons become more effective when they are frequently activated. Another mechanism is neurogenesis, that is, the formation of new neurons, a process observed in certain regions of the brain such as the hippocampus. There is also cortical reorganization, through which certain areas can take over the functions of others in case of injuries or environmental changes. These findings support the idea that the internal software is not only metaphorically rewritable but literally modifiable at the structural level. When a person goes through an intense experience, positive or negative, it can produce lasting changes in the neural network. Trauma, for example, can strengthen circuits associated with fear, while repeated experiences of safety and support can strengthen networks associated with trust. And the logic of the theory formulated by Bucur Loredan. This process explains how the environment becomes a programmer. The child who grows up in an environment characterized by violence develops hypervigilance circuits. His inner software will interpret neutral stimuli as potentially threatening because the neural connections associated with danger have been repeatedly activated. Conversely, a child raised in a stable environment will strengthen his networks associated with safety and cooperation. An essential aspect of neuroplasticity is that repetition is the key to consolidation. A single event can produce impact, but stable patterns emerge through repeated experiences. This principle is similar to the process of training an artificial intelligence algorithm. Frequently entered data determines the adjustment of internal parameters. In the case of humans, repeated experiences adjust neural connections. Neuroplasticity also explains the possibility of personal change. If a person has developed an anxious pattern, this pattern can be modified through repeated interventions that introduce new emotional experiences. Cognitive behavioral therapy, for example, works precisely by gradually rewriting the connections associated with dysfunctional thoughts. Repeating alternative interpretations of reality leads, over time, to the strengthening of new circuits. Within the human hard and soft theory, neuroplasticity is the mechanism that allows software to be updated. Without plasticity, the individual would remain stuck in the original programming. With plasticity, the possibility of evolution appears. This introduces an element of hope and responsibility. Although we do not choose the environment we are born into, we can influence the environment we choose to live in later. Another important aspect is the interaction between emotion and plasticity. Research shows that intense emotions increase the likelihood of memory consolidation. Effectively charged events are stored more strongly. Thus, repeated emotional experiences become priority code, and therefore close relationships have a major impact on personality development. Plasticity is also influenced by attention. Deliberate concentration on an activity intensifies neural reorganization. Basically, what we choose to practice becomes stronger in the structure of the brain. This observation has profound implications. Our attention is a programming tool. At the same time, plasticity has limits. Not all patterns can be easily changed, especially if they have been consolidated over many years. Rewriting the software takes time, repetition, and sometimes external support. However, the fact that change is possible contradicts the fatalistic idea that personality is definitively determined by the past. Neuroplasticity also provides an explanation for the phenomenon of adaptation to new environments. When a person migrates to a different culture, they may initially experience dissonance and confusion. Over time, through repeated exposure, the brain reorganizes connections to integrate the new norms and values. The software updates itself to match the new context. In conclusion, neuroplasticity represents the biological foundation of identity rewriting. It confirms that the biological hard is not static but malleable. Experiences shape neural structure and neural structure influences behavior. Thus, the interaction between hard and soft is a circular and continuous process. The human hard and soft theory states that life is a permanent process of programming and reprogramming. Neuroplasticity is the mechanism by which this process becomes possible. If in the past we were considered prisoners of biology, today we understand that biology itself is flexible. The inner software is not a final sentence. It is an adaptive system capable of updating. Through new experiences, through education, through relationships, and through awareness, the code can be modified. Thus, neuroplasticity is not only a scientific concept, but also a statement about human potential. Change is possible because the biological infrastructure was designed to learn, adapt, and evolve. Chapter 3: Biological Regulation Systems. Homeostasis and the continuous dialogue between hard and soft. In the architecture of the theory of human hard and soft, the biological regulation systems represent the fundamental mechanism through which the hard permanently communicates with the soft. If in the previous chapters we established that the hard is the biological infrastructure, and the soft represents the totality of learned patterns and informational processes, in this chapter we analyze how the body maintains internal balance and transmits essential data to the neural system. The central concept of this analysis is homeostasis, a term introduced and developed by Walter Cannon. Cannon demonstrated that the human body functions as a self-regulating system, which maintains the stability of the internal environment despite external variations. Body temperature, blood sugar level, blood pressure, and water balance are regulated by automatic mechanisms without conscious intervention. Within the human hard and soft theory, homeostasis represents the stability protocol of the hard. It ensures the optimal functioning of the biological system, and any deviation is signaled to the brain in the form of sensations or impulses. Thus, the hard continuously transmits biological data to the neural processing system: hunger, thirst, stress, fatigue. These signals are not just passive sensations but operational instructions that require intervention. Hunger is a clear example of the dialogue between hard and soft. When the blood glucose level drops, the body activates hormonal mechanisms that signal the need for food intake. This signal reaches the brain and is interpreted as a feeling of hunger. But the behavioral response is not exclusively biologically determined. The soft intervenes through habits, cultural preferences, previous experiences, and social norms. Thus, two people with the same physiological level of hunger may react differently. One may choose a balanced meal. Another may consume foods associated with emotional comfort. Thirst works similarly. Water imbalance is detected by specialized receptors, and the brain receives the signal of dehydration. But the final behavior, what, when, and how much we drink, is influenced by programming, cultural and experimental. In some environments, regular water consumption is encouraged. In others, liquids are more commonly associated with sweetened beverages or stimulants. Soft filters the biological signal and translates it into concrete action. Stress is another essential regulatory mechanism. When the body perceives a threat, real or Anticipated, it activates the fight-or-flight response. Heart rate increases, breathing quickens, and energy is mobilized for action. Hard, this mechanism is vital for survival. But in modern society, many of the threats are symbolic or psychological, not physical. Soft plays a crucial role in interpreting situations. If an individual has been programmed to perceive social evaluations as major dangers, the stress response can be triggered frequently even in the absence of real risk. Fatigue completes this picture of biological signals. The body needs regular periods of rest to restore metabolic and neural balance. Lack of sleep affects the ability to concentrate, emotional regulation, and the functioning of the immune system. However, the decision to respect or ignore fatigue signals is influenced by software. Performance culture, professional pressures, or personal habits can cause an individual to ignore the biological need for rest. At this point, the human hard and soft theory highlights the bidirectional nature of the relationship between biological infrastructure and programming informational. The hardware transmits raw data and the software interprets and integrates them into a framework of values and experiences. If the software is unbalanced or rigid, the interpretation of biological signals can become dysfunctional. For example, in eating disorders, the natural signals of hunger and satiety can be distorted by cultural or emotional beliefs. In chronic anxiety, the stress response can be excessively activated, even in neutral situations. In occupational burnout, fatigue signals are systematically ignored until severe physiological consequences occur. These situations illustrate how software can overwrite or misinterpret hardware messages. Homeostasis is not only a biological mechanism but also a metaphor for existential balance. On a physical level, the body tends toward stability. On a psychological level, the individual seeks coherence between experience and beliefs. When a major imbalance occurs, the system reacts to restore order. This reaction can be adaptive or maladaptive, depending on the programming existing. Another relevant concept is allostasis, the extension of the idea of homeostasis, which describes how the organism anticipates and adapts to changing demands. Within the human hard and soft theory, allostasis can be interpreted as a dynamic update of the software depending on the context. The system does not just react to changes but anticipates them based on previous experiences. This ability to anticipate demonstrates the interdependence between experience and biology. If an individual has repeatedly experienced dangerous situations, the body can become hypersensitive to minor cues of threat. Conversely, a stable and predictable environment can reduce the frequency of activation of the stress response. The soft influences the activation threshold of the hard as a whole. The biological regulatory systems confirm that the human being is an integrated system, not a sum of separate components. The hard is not a simple passive support, and the soft is not an abstract entity independent of biology. They form a continuous circuit of feedback. The central message of this chapter is that internal balance is the basic condition for optimal functioning. When biological signals are correctly recognized and integrated by software, the resulting behavior supports health and adaptation. When these signals are ignored or distorted, dysfunctions occur. Human hard and soft theory emphasizes the importance of awareness of the dialogue between body and mind. Physiological but also an educational and cultural one by recalibrating the interpretation of these signals. The individual can restore the balance between biological infrastructure and informational programming. Thus, biological regulatory systems are not just automatic mechanisms but the expression of an integrated biological intelligence. They demonstrate that the hard is constantly transmitting data essential for survival and adaptation, and the software has the responsibility to interpret and transform them into appropriate actions. In conclusion, homeostasis is the foundation stability, and the continuous interaction between hard and soft represents the engine of human existence. Every biological sensation is a message. The way we choose to interpret it determines the quality of our life and the direction in which we develop. Part 2. Software Writing, Development. Chapter 4. Early Cognitive Development. In the architecture of the human hard and soft theory, if the hard represents the biological infrastructure, then early cognitive development represents the initial phase of writing the software. This is the period when the fundamental mental structures are built, and the child begins to organize reality into intelligible patterns. The software is not completely installed at birth. It is built progressively through the constant interaction between the child and the environment. One of the most influential researchers in the field of cognitive development is Jean Piaget, who demonstrated that the cognitive structures of the child develops in stages. Piaget rejected the idea that little ones are adults in miniature and argued that their thinking has a qualitatively different structure at each stage of development. In terms of the theory of human hard and soft, this means that the software is installed in successive versions, each with its own limits and possibilities. At birth, the child has only reflexes and biological predispositions. There are no concepts such as causality, object permanence, or logic formal. These are built through experience. Piaget identified the first stage as the sensoromotor stage, in which the child learns through direct action on the environment. Through touch, movement, and exploration, he begins to form the first mental schemas. A schema, in Piaget's view, is a cognitive structure through which the individual organizes information. In the metaphor of the human hard and soft theory, the schema is an initial line of code, a small algorithm through which the child interprets reality. For example, when a child shakes a toy and it produces a sound, he begins to build a relationship between action and effect. Repetition of this experience reinforces the schema of causality. The process of cognitive development involves two essential mechanisms: assimilation and accommodation. Assimilation involves integrating new information into existing schemas, while accommodation involves modifying schemas to cope with information that does not fit in the language of our theory. Assimilation is running the existing code, and accommodation is rewriting it. The child is not born with complete conceptual structures. He does not have a predefined understanding of time, space, or morality. These concepts develop progressively as interactions with the environment become more complex in the pre-operational stage. For example, the child begins to use symbols and language, but his thinking remains egocentric. He perceives the world from his own perspective and has difficulty understanding the point of view of others. This limitation is not a defect but a necessary stage in the development process. It is still in the construction phase as the child advances to the stage of concrete operations. He begins to understand concepts such as conservation of quantity and reversibility. In this phase, cognitive algorithms become more sophisticated and the ability to process information increases. The last stage identified by Piaget is that of formal operations, which appears in adolescence. At this time, the individual can think abstractly, formulate hypotheses, and analyze hypothetical situations. The soft reaches a level of complexity that allows advanced logical functioning. However, this development is not automatic. It depends on the experiences offered by the environment. Within the human hard and soft theory, early cognitive development is essential because it lays the foundation for all subsequent processes. The first interactions with parents, the language used in the family, and the emotional patterns experienced influence the way the child will organize reality. Each repeated experience strengthens certain neural connections, and these connections become the physical support of the software. A crucial element is the fact that cognitive development is dependent on the environment. Piaget showed that learning occurs through active exploration. The child is not a passive container into which information is poured, but an active builder of knowledge. In terms of our theory, the software is not installed externally directly but is co-created through interaction. This process explains why cultural differences influence the way of thinking. Children raised in different environments develop different cognitive schemas because their experiences are distinct. The value system, language, and social norms become an integral part of the software. Thus, reality perceived is filtered through structures built in childhood. Early cognitive development has profound implications for identity. If a child is encouraged to explore and ask questions, his software will include algorithms for curiosity and critical thinking. If he is discouraged or punished for initiative, patterns of inhibition may be reinforced. The repetition of experiences determines the stability of these patterns. Another important aspect is the relationship between emotion and cognition. Although Piaget focused on cognitive structures, subsequent research has shown that intellectual development is closely related to the emotional climate. Effective security facilitates exploration and learning. In its absence, the soft can develop defensive mechanisms that limit cognitive development. The logic of the human hard and soft theory, writing software in childhood represents the stage in which installs the mental operating system. Subsequently, all new information will be processed through this system. Therefore, the first experiences have a disproportionate importance. They establish the initial parameters of the interpretation of reality. However, cognitive development does not stop at adolescence. Although Piaget delineated clear stages, modern research suggests that the process continues into adulthood. Complex experiences, education, and reflection can lead to further restructuring of the software. This confirms the coherence of Bucur Loredan's theory with neuroscientific findings on plasticity. In conclusion, Early cognitive development is the process by which the human software is first written. The child is not born with complete conceptual structures. They are progressively built through active interaction with the environment. Each stage adds a level of complexity, and each experience contributes to the configuration of the internal network of interpretation. The theory of human hard and soft integrates these discoveries into a coherent model. The hard provides the infrastructure, the environment provides the data, and the child progressively builds the algorithms that will guide the whole life. Understanding this process helps us recognize the power of education and the responsibility of the environment in shaping human identity. Chapter 5: The Influence of the Social Environment. Culture, Language, and External Programming of Human Software. Within the human hard and soft theory, cognitive development cannot be understood exclusively through biological mechanisms or through individual exploration of the physical environment. There is an essential dimension that shapes the structure of the internal software. The social environment, if the hard represents the biological infrastructure, and the first cognitive schemes are built through direct interaction with the world, then culture and language represent the advanced code installed through human relationships. One of the most important theorists of the social development of thought is Lev Vygotsky. Vygotsky argued that cognitive development is fundamentally influenced by the cultural context and social interactions, in opposition to the strictly individualist perspective. He stated that thinking is initially formed at the social level and is subsequently internalized. In other words, what first appears between people then becomes part of the individual's mental structure. In the language of human hard and soft theory, the social environment functions as a programmer externally. The child does not write his own cognitive code. He receives lines of programming through dialogue, observation, and participation in the life of the community. Language is the main tool through which this programming takes place. Vygotsky considered language not only a means of communication but also a tool for organizing thought. When the child learns words, he acquires not only labels for objects but also conceptual structures. Each learned term delimits a category, establishes relationships, and provides a framework for interpreting reality. In our metaphor, language is the programming language through which software is written. A central concept in Vygotsky's theory is the zone of proximal development, the difference between what a child can do alone and what he can achieve with the help of an adult or a more advanced peer. This principle shows that development is not an isolated process but an assisted one. External programming occurs through guidance, modeling, and correction. Within the human hard and soft theory, the zone of proximal development can be interpreted as a software update space. The adult or mentor introduces new code, providing support until the child can independently run the learned algorithm. Thus, the skills are initially external and gradually become internal. The social environment transmits not only cognitive information but also norms, values, and moral interpretations. These feedbacks become an integral part of the internal software. Culture provides a frame of reference that shapes perception. The way in which success is defined, the importance given to education, the attitude towards authority or cooperation, all these elements are integrated into the mental structure of the individual. The software is not universally identical. It reflects the specifics of the environment in which it was written. A simple example is the difference between individualistic and collectivist societies and environments where autonomy is valued. The child is encouraged to express his opinions and assert his independence. In other cultures, the emphasis may be on group harmony and respect for tradition. These guidelines become basic algorithms in decision processing. The social environment also influences identity development. The labels assigned to the child, talented, problematic, responsible, can become internalized self-definitions. Repetition of these labels strengthens neural circuits associated with self-image. In terms of the theory, the soft records these messages as basic instructions about who the individual is. Another essential aspect is the role of inner dialogue. Vygotsky showed that external speech becomes, over time, internal speech. The child begins by verbalizing out loud what he is doing, then internalizes this process. Thus, language becomes a tool for self-regulation. The software not only processes external information but also generates internal instructions. This transformation illustrates how the social environment shapes even the intimate processes of thinking. What we hear repeatedly from parents or teachers can become the inner voice that guides our behavior. The external programmer gradually becomes part of the internal system. The influence of the social environment also extends to emotions. Culture determines how emotions are expressed and regulated. In some contexts, the expression of anger is discouraged. In others, it may be tolerated or even valued. The inner soft teaches what emotions are acceptable and how to manage them. Human hard and soft theory emphasizes that this social programming is not neutral. The quality of the environment directly influences the structure of the software. Stimulating environment, which offers support and opportunities for exploration, facilitates the development of adaptive algorithms. An unstable or abusive environment can install defensive patterns and distorted interpretations of reality. The mass media and modern technology are, in turn, powerful external programmers. Repeated messages about success, beauty, or social status can influence self-perception and personal goals. The internal software does not distinguish between traditional sources of authority and new ones, digital sources. It records and consolidates frequently encountered patterns. An important element is the capacity for critical reflection. If the individual develops the ability to analyze and evaluate the messages received, external programming can be filtered. In the absence of this capacity, the software automatically takes over the dominant content of the environment. Education thus becomes an essential tool for protecting and refining the inner code. Within the human hard and soft theory, the social environment is not only context but co-author of identity. The software, it is the result of a continuous collaboration between the biological infrastructure and cultural influences. This perspective explains why changing the environment can lead to significant transformations in behavior and thinking. At the same time, The theory recognizes that external programming does not eliminate individual responsibility. Once the consciousness becomes mature enough, the individual can evaluate and modify the internal code. But the starting point is inevitably influenced by the social environment in which it has developed. In conclusion, the influence of the social environment is decisive in writing human software. Culture and language shape cognitive structures, values, and identity. The environment functions as an external programmer that installs code through interaction, dialogue, and modeling. The theory of human hard and soft integrates this perspective into a coherent framework. Hard provides the potential, individual experience contributes to the construction of schemas, and the social environment provides the language and values that give final shape to the internal software. Understanding this process highlights the responsibility collective in the formation of future generations and the importance of an environment that programs adaptive, balanced, and conscious. Chapter 6: Attachment Theory. Attachment as the installation of the emotional operating system. Within the human hard and soft theory, the early relationship between the child and the caregiver represents the critical moment of the installation of the emotional operating system. If in the first chapters we analyzed the biological infrastructure, hardware, and the process of progressive writing of the software through cognitive and social interaction, here we penetrate into the emotional core of human programming. The British psychiatrist and psychoanalyst John Bowlby formulated the theory of attachment in the second half of the 20th century, demonstrating that the early connection between the child and the attachment figure, usually the mother, is not only an effective phenomenon but a biological necessity. Attachment is not an emotional luxury. It is a survival mechanism. In the language of human hard and soft theory, attachment is the first stable emotional architecture that structures the inner soft. 1. Attachment, a biological system programmed for survival. Bowlby proposed the idea that attachment is an innate behavioral system evolutionarily selected. The child seeks the proximity of the adult for protection, and the adult responds with caring behaviors. This dynamic creates the first emotional scripts in our theory. The hardware, brain and nervous system, is genetically primed for connection. The software, emotional models, is written according to the quality of the answers received. A child who receives a constant response to crying, to fear, to the need for contact registers a fundamental rule: the world is safe, my needs matter. Instead, an ignored or rejected child registers another algorithm: the world is unpredictable, I have to protect myself. These rules become part of the emotional operating system. 2. Mary Ainsworth's experiments. Testing emotional software. Bowlby's collaborator Mary Ainsworth developed the famous strange situation experiment by observing children's reactions to separation and reunification with their mother. She identified distinct patterns of attachment. In computer terms, these patterns represent different versions of the emotional operating system. 1. Secure attachment. The child explores the environment but looks for the safe base. Software installed, trust plus balanced autonomy. 2. Anxious ambivalent attachment. The child becomes extremely dependent and insecure. Software installed, emotional hypervigilance. 3. Avoidant attachment. The child seems independent but avoids emotional closeness. Software installed suppression of emotion for self-protection. 4. Disorganized attachment, identified later. Contradictory, chaotic reactions. Soft installed emotional confusion and lack of internal predictability. These patterns are not moral labels. They are consequences of the programming environment. 3. The internal working model, the invisible code of relationships. Bowlby introduced the concept of internal working model, internal functioning model. This model represents self-image, image of others. The rules of how relationships work. In human hard and soft theory, this model is the invisible code that runs in the background. A secure attachment adult will interpret a minor conflict as solvable. An anxiously attached adult will interpret the same conflict as impending abandonment. An avoidant adult will interpret conflict as a signal of emotional withdrawal. The software does not describe the objective reality but filters it. 4. Neurobiology of attachment. Modern findings in neuroscience confirm Bowlby's observations. Early relationships influence the development of neurobiological systems involved in emotional regulation. Amygdala, fear processing. Prefrontal cortex, impulse regulation. Limbic system, emotions and attachment. Physical contact, a calm voice, facial expressions activate the release of oxytocin, the attachment hormone. Their lack excessively activates the stress system, HPA axis, increasing the cortisol level. Therefore, hard is structurally modified by the quality of the relationship. Emotional soft is inscribed through repeated experience. 5. Attachment and fear programming. If a child grows up in an unstable environment, violence, neglect, abuse, the software installs a basic rule: danger is permanent. This rule can generate emotional hyperactivation, adjustment difficulties, distrust in relationships, compulsive seeking of validation or extreme withdrawal. It's not a conscious choice, it's programming. Instead, secure attachment creates a different algorithm. I can tolerate the discomfort, I can ask for help. This influences future decisions, choosing a partner, how to resolve conflicts, reporting to authority. 6. Emotional intelligence and adult relationships. Contemporary research shows that childhood attachment patterns are found in adult romantic relationships. An anxious individual may constantly seek reassurance. An avoidant individual may avoid deep commitment. When two different software meet, it can occur. Stable complementarity. Repetitive conflict. Reactivation of early traumas. In our theory, the meeting between two people is the meeting between two emotional operating systems. If one runs on distrust and the other on opening, tension appears. If both run on security, collaboration becomes fluent. 7. Rewriting the emotional software. An essential point: attachment is not implacable destiny. Neuroplasticity shows that corrective experiences can partially rewrite the software. Therapy, stable relationships, safe experiences can change patterns. The process involves Awareness. Repeated exposure to safe relationships. Learned emotional regulation. The emotional software becomes more flexible. However, this rewriting is slow as it involves changes at both the cognitive and neural levels. 8. Attachment and perception of reality. A central element of the human hard and soft theory is the idea that we do not perceive reality directly but through programmed filters. Attachment influences how much trust we give to others, how we interpret intentions, how easily we forgive, how much emotional risk we allow ourselves. Thus, relational reality is an internal construction. Point 2. People can experience the same situation, but different emotional software generates opposite interpretations. 9. The spiritual dimension of attachment. In many religious traditions, man's relationship with divinity is described in terms of trust and abandonment. It is possible that attachment patterns also influence how the individual relates to the transcendent. Secure attachment, belief based on trust. Anxious attachment, fear of punishment. Avoidant attachment, spiritual distancing. Thus, the emotional software also shapes the spiritual experience. 10. Conclusion. Attachment as the foundation of emotional identity. In the architecture of human hard and soft theory, attachment is the first operating system installed over the biological infrastructure. Through it, we learn if the world is safe or dangerous. We learn if emotions are acceptable or dangerous. We learn if we can trust or if we have to defend ourselves. We don't choose our first programs, but we receive them. But once we become aware of them, we can begin the process of updating them. Attachment is not just a psychological theory. It is the source code of our relationships. And in understanding this code begins the freedom to rewrite our own software. Chapter 7. Learning by modeling. Modeling as a central mechanism for writing behavioral software. In the architecture of human hard and soft theory, if attachment installs the emotional operating system, then modeling learning installs the behavioral applications. The human soft is not only written by direct experience but overwhelmingly by observing others. Canadian psychologist Albert Bandura revolutionized the understanding of human development by formulating social learning theory. He demonstrated that people learn behaviors, attitudes, and emotional reactions by observing and imitating. Models. Significant things around them. In the language of this theory, observation is the process of installing the behavioral code. 1. The Bobo doll experiment. Proof of programming by observation. Bandura performed the famous experiment with the Bobo doll, demonstrating that children who observed an adult exhibiting aggressive behavior towards the doll tended to reproduce the aggressive behavior later. The conclusion was clear: children do not need direct rewards to learn a behavior. Observation is enough. In terms of the human hard and soft theory, the hardware, brain, records the observed behavioral sequence. The behavioral software saves it as a possible future response. The behavior becomes a routine available to run. 2. The 4 stages of modeling. Bandura described 4 fundamental processes in modeling learning. Attention. The individual must observe the behavior. Retention. The behavior must be memorized. Reproduction. The ability to execute it. Motivation. The existence of a reason to repeat it. These stages represent the writing pipeline of the behavioral software. If a child observes that a parent resolves conflicts through violence and sees that this behavior produces results, fear, control, the software can record. Violence is effective if they notice that a teacher resolves conflicts through dialogue and empathy. Another algorithm can be installed. Communication produces solutions. 3. The family environment, the first programming center. The family is the first modeling laboratory. The child learns through imitation. The way of speaking. How to manage stress. The way to treat the authority. The way to express love. Not only words are programmed but also micro-expressions, tone of voice, reactions to failure. A child raised in an environment where parents display self-control will internalize self-control. A child raised in an environment dominated by impulsive reactions will consider impulsivity to be the norm. Behavioral software is not written by explicit instructions but by repeated observation. 4. Media and new digital media as external programmers. In contemporary society, modeling is not limited to the family. Social networks, movies, influencers, video games become powerful behavioral models. The human brain does not make a clear distinction between direct experience and observed experience. If a behavior is repeated often enough and associated with success, status, or social reward, the software can consider it valid. Thus, glorifying aggression can normalize aggression. Hyperconsumerism can install the my value equals what I own algorithm. Constant comparison can generate insufficiency scripts. Modern modeling is accelerated by technology. 5. The role of identification with the model. Bandura pointed out that the likelihood of imitation increases when the individual identifies with the model. Identification can be determined by statute, similarity, admiration, authorities. A child will imitate a parent more easily than a stranger. A teenager will imitate an influencer perceived as successful. In human hard and soft theory, identification is the process by which the software prioritizes a pattern in the writing process. 6. Emotional modeling. Modeling learning is not only about external behaviors but also about emotional reactions. If a parent overreacts to minor dangers, the child can learn fear. If an adult calmly manages tense situations, the child learns self-regulation. Thus, behavioral software is closely related to emotional software. Behavior and emotion are integrated into a single functional code. 7. Moral modeling. Moral values are also transmitted through modeling. A child who sees parents obeying rules even in the absence of supervision registers the rule. Integrity is constant. A child who sees incongruity between speech and action installs another rule. The rules are negotiable. This is where the differences in the perception of ethics come from. Moral software is not installed through sermons but through behavioral coherence. 8. Self-efficacy, the engine of software execution. Another central concept introduced by Bandura is self-efficacy, the belief in one's ability to succeed. This influences perseverance, resilience, taking the risk. If a child observes patterns that overcome obstacles and receives messages of encouragement, the software installs the script. I can handle it. If he notices resignation and lack of initiative, he can install the effort is useless. Thus, modeling influences not only behavior but also internal motivation. 9. Conflict between different software. In the context of the general theory, when two people with different behavioral software interact, tensions can arise. For example, an individual programmed for direct confrontation, an individual programmed for avoidance. These differences are not just personality traits but results of different modeling. The conflict is not between people but between internalized algorithms. 10. Rewriting through new models. The essential news is that the behavioral software can be updated. The process involves exposure to alternative models, repetition of new behaviors, rewarding success. Therapy, mentoring, education can introduce new models. If an individual raised in an aggressive environment meets a mentor who manages conflicts through dialogue and observes the effectiveness of this method, the software can begin the updating process. Neuroplasticity allows this rewriting. 11. The social dimension of responsibility. Within the human hard and soft theory, modeling learning involves a major social responsibility. Every adult is a potential programmer for future generations. Every observable behavior becomes a possible line of code. Society as a whole functions as a modeling ecosystem. Conclusion: modeling as continuous writing of behavioral software. Modeling learning is one of the most powerful mechanisms for writing human software. We don't just learn from what we're told, but we learn from what we see. Behavioral software is the result of family models, cultural models, media models, relational models. If attachment installs the emotional operating system, patterning installs behavioral applications. Understanding this mechanism provides the key to change. To change behavior, we must change patterns. Ultimately, each of us is simultaneously user of owned software, product of previous modeling, programmer for those who observe us. And in this continuous network of observation and imitation, the new version of human software is written every day. Part 3. The unconscious as the engine of the system. Chapter 8. Unconscious structures. The unconscious as an automatic processor of human hard and soft. In the general architecture of the theory of human hard and soft, if the hard represents the biological infrastructure and the soft is the set of programming acquired through experience, then the unconscious is the automatic execution engine of the entire system. IT runs in the background, processes data, activates responses, and influences decisions without the user, consciousness, being fully informed. The concept of the unconscious was systematically formulated by Sigmund Freud, who argued that a Large part of psychic life is inaccessible to direct consciousness. Repressed thoughts, desires, conflicts, and memories continue to influence behavior, even if the individual is not aware of them. In the language of hard-soft theory, Freud identified the existence of an invisible processor that runs code without a graphical interface. 1. The Freudian structural model, the first map of the internal system. Freud proposed two major models of the psyche. The best known is the structural model. ID, primary instincts. Ego, mediating court. Superego, internalized norms. In our analogy, the ID represents the raw impulses of the biological heart: hunger, sexuality, aggression. The superego represents the moral rules installed by social modeling. The ego functions as a management interface between the demands of the hard and the norms of the cultural soft. The internal conflict occurs when these components run incompatible instructions. For example, Hardul requests the satisfaction of a wish. The moral code forbids the behavior. The unconscious processor generates anxiety. Thus, the final behavior is the result of an automatic negotiation. 2. Unconscious processes. Most of the system running. Modern research in cognitive psychology confirms that most information processing is automatic. Perception, pattern recognition, rapid emotional reactions are processed before the conscious mind intervenes. In human hard and soft theory, the unconscious is the main processor, the filtration system, the prioritization mechanism. Consciousness is just the user interface. When we say "I decided," in reality the decision was prepared by automatic processes that quickly evaluated previously stored experiences. 3. Backup. Protected archiving of data. Freud introduced the concept of repression, the mechanism by which unacceptable memories or desires are excluded from consciousness. In the computer analogy, repression is the moving of data into an encrypted folder of the system. They are not deleted, only hidden. The problem is that this data continues to influence the system. Through dreams. Through slips. Through psychosomatic symptoms. Through exaggerated reactions. The software runs scripts based on invisible files. 4. Defense mechanisms, the psychic firewall. Freud and later Anna Freud described the defense mechanisms: denial, projection, rationalization, sublimation. These mechanisms are automatic strategies to protect the stability of the system. For example, projection, attributing one's own impulses to someone else. Denial, refusal to accept a painful reality. Rationalization, the logical justification of an emotional decision. In hard-soft theory, defense mechanisms are emotional firewalls that prevent system overload. They are not moral defects but temporary adaptive solutions. 5. The unconscious and behavioral automatism. An individual may repeat dysfunctional relationship patterns without understanding why. For example, the repeated choice of emotionally unavailable partners. Sabotaging personal success. Disproportionate reactions to minor criticisms. These behaviors are the result of unconscious scripts. The software was written in childhood and runs automatically without updating. The unconscious acts as a predictive algorithm based on past experiences. 6. Modern confirmations. Dual processing systems. Contemporary psychology describes two processing systems. System 1. Fast, intuitive, automatic. System 2. Slow, deliberate, conscious. These findings validate the Freudian idea in a modern form. System 1 corresponds to the unconscious processor. System 2 represents the conscious interface. Most daily decisions are made by System 1. Consciousness intervenes especially in complex or new situations. 7. The emotional unconscious. The amygdala can react to threatening stimuli before the prefrontal cortex processes the information. This fact demonstrates that fear can be activated before the individual knows what he is afraid of. In the human hard and soft theory, this phenomenon illustrates the autonomy of the unconscious processor. The emotional soft runs survival scenarios based on previous experiences. 8. The role of dreams. For Freud, dreams were the royal road to the unconscious. In our analogy, dreams are system maintenance processes. They reorganize data, process emotions, and create new connections. Even if the Freudian symbolic interpretation is debatable, modern research shows that REM sleep is essential for memory consolidation and emotional regulation. Thus, the unconscious works actively in the absence of consciousness. 9. The collective unconscious and cultural programming. Although different from Freud, Carl Jung introduced the idea of archetypes, universal symbolic structures. In the hard-soft perspective, we can extend the analysis to deeply internalized cultural influences. Myths. Symbols. Social narratives. They become part of the collective unconscious processor that influences individual identity. 10. Can the CPU be upgraded unconsciously? The fundamental question is whether the unconscious can be changed. The answer is yes, but the process is complex. Tools such as psychotherapy, guided introspection, meditation, corrective experiences. I can bring unconscious content into the conscious area. Once brought to light, the code can be evaluated and rewritten. Awareness is the first step in updating. 11. The unconscious and personal freedom. If most behavior is automatic, an essential question arises: are we free? The theory of human hard and soft does not deny freedom but redefines it. Freedom does not mean the absence of programming. Freedom means the ability to become aware of programming and change it. In the absence of awareness, we run scripts. In the presence of awareness, we can choose to update. Conclusion: the invisible engine of the human system. The unconscious is the silent engine that prioritizes information, activates emotions, triggers reactions, maintains system stability. Freud opened the first map of this invisible territory. Modern neuroscience confirms that automatic processing dominates mental life. Within the human hard and soft theory, hard provides the biological infrastructure. The software contains the acquired programming. The unconscious executes the code in the background. Consciousness is only a narrow window through which we observe a small part of the process. To understand unconscious structures is to understand why we do what we do even when we think we choose freely. And in this understanding true autonomy begins, the ability to stop the automatic execution and rewrite the inner code. Chapter 9. Dual Processing Systems. System 1 and System 2 in the human hard and soft architecture. Within the human hard and soft theory, if the unconscious is the automatic engine of the system, then the dual processing systems describe the concrete way in which this engine operates. Psychologist and Nobel Prize laureate Daniel Kahneman formulated one of the most influential cognitive theories of the 20th century. The existence of two fundamental ways of processing information called System 1 and System 2. This theory provides a solid scientific basis for the central claim of the hard-soft model. Most of our reactions come from software already written and run automatically. 1. System 1, the fast and automatic processor. System 1 is fast, intuitive, automatic, emotional, associative. It works without conscious effort and is constantly active. Examples of System 1 activity: recognition of a familiar face, automatic completion of an expression, the fear reaction to a sudden noise, instant evaluation of a person. In the hard-soft architecture, System 1 is the engine that runs the previously installed scripts. It operates based on the patterns already written in the software. When we encounter a situation similar to a previously experienced one, System 1 activates the associated response without detailed analysis. It is efficient, fast, and adaptive. Without it, we would be paralyzed by the need to analyze every detail of reality. 2. System 2, the slow and deliberative processor. System 2 is slow, analytical, logical, energy-consuming, aware. It intervenes when we solve a math problem, we analyze an important decision, we evaluate the long-term consequences, we detect an error. System 2 is the higher control interface of the psychic system. In our theory, it represents the software update capability. If System 1 automatically runs existing programming, System 2 can verify, correct, or modify that programming. 3. Why does System 1 dominate? The human brain is an expensive metabolic organ. Deliberative processing consumes energy. From an evolutionary perspective, it is efficient to use automatic processes as much as possible. Thus, System 1 takes over most of the daily tasks. This explains why we react emotionally before thinking. We repeat behavioral patterns. We make quick decisions based on intuition. In the human hard and soft theory, this means that previously written software controls most reactions. Consciousness intervenes only occasionally. 4. Heuristics, cognitive shortcuts of the software. Kahneman demonstrated that System 1 uses heuristics, simple rules of rapid evaluation. Examples: availability heuristic. We estimate probability based on how easily we recall an example. Heuristic of representativeness. We judge based on similarity to a prototype. Anchoring. We rely excessively on the first information received. These mechanisms are efficient but can generate systematic errors. In the hard-soft analogy, heuristics are automatic subroutines installed in software to optimize speed. They save energy but can produce distortions. 5. Cognitive biases. Errors of the automatic software. Biases are consequences of the operation of system.The. Examples. Confirmation bias. We look for information that confirms our beliefs. The halo effect. A positive characteristic influences the global perception. Overconfidence. These prove that the software is not neutral. It filters reality through already existing patterns. Thus, two people can interpret the same situation differently because system.1 activates different scripts. 6. The relationship between system.1 and the unconscious. System.1 largely corresponds to the unconscious processor described earlier. He detects patterns, generates emotions, produces instant reactions. System.2 is the supervisory body that can correct but rarely intervenes. This dynamic explains why behavioral change is difficult. Automatic software runs constantly and deliberative intervention requires repeated effort. 7. Dual systems and internal conflict. We often experience conflicts between automatic reaction and rational analysis. Examples. The impulse to respond aggressively versus the desire to remain calm. The desire for immediate reward versus the long-term goal. This conflict reflects the interaction between the two systems and the human hard and soft theory. System.1 is running the old software. System.2 is trying to install a new patch. If System.2 is not sufficiently active or trained, System.1 wins. 8. Education as System.2 training. Education develops analytical ability and self-control. Practicing deliberation, critical thinking, and reflection strengthens the circuits associated with System.2. In computer terms, we train the system administrator to more effectively oversee automatic processes. This is the key to cognitive maturation. 9. Emotions and System.1 dominance. Emotions are generated quickly and automatically. System.1 reacts before analysis is possible. Therefore, fear appears instantly. The attraction is spontaneous. Antipathy can be immediate. System.2 can later reassess the situation, but the initial emotion has already been activated. This mechanism explains why emotional persuasion is often more effective than logical argument. 10. Rewriting the software through the intervention of System.2. Although System.1 dominates, change is possible. The process involves automatic pattern identification, suspension of the immediate reaction, deliberative analysis, repetition of an alternative behavior. Through repetition, the new behavior can become automated and transferred to System.1. Thus, updating the software involves moving a process from the deliberative zone to the automatic zone. 11. Implications for human hard and soft theory. Dual systems provide a mechanistic explanation of the statement. We don't live our lives. We run our programming. Most reactions come from early attachment, social modeling, emotional experiences, unconscious mechanisms. All of this is stored in software and executed by System.1. Real freedom comes when System.2 becomes active enough to observe and modify these processes. Conclusion: the balance between automatic and deliberative. Dual systems theory complements the hard-soft model by explaining how internal programming is executed. Hard provides the biological infrastructure. The software contains patterns written by experience. System.1 runs these patterns automatically. System.2 provides the ability to review and update. Most of psychic life is automatic, but the human capacity for reflection offers a unique advantage. We can become aware of our scripts, and in this awareness lies the difference between reaction and choice. Dual systems do not deny programming but provide the key to intervention in it. And in understanding the balance between fast and slow, between automatic and deliberative, begins the process of conscious maturation of the human soft. Part 4. Reality as a Construction. Chapter 10. The Social Construction of Reality. How Truth Becomes the Norm in Human Software. In the architecture of the theory of human hard and soft, so far we have analyzed the biological infrastructure, the hard, the mechanisms of writing the software, attachment, modeling, learning, and the automatic engine of execution, the unconscious and the dual systems. At this stage, we enter an essential dimension, reality itself. What is the reality we think we live in? Is it objective, or is it the product of an internalized collective construction? Sociologists Peter L. Berger and Thomas Luckman formulated in their seminal work the theory that social reality is constructed through human interaction and progressive internalization. The social world is not only discovered, it is produced, transmitted, and then perceived as natural. In the language of human hard and soft theory, social reality is collectively written code, which becomes an internal operating system. 1. Externalization. How we create the social world. Berger and Luckman described the first process as externalization. People create institutions, rules, languages, traditions. Examples: legal systems, moral norms, gender roles, cultural customs. These are products of repeated human action, and the hard-soft analogy, outsourcing is the collective programming phase. Society writes code through repeated behaviors and shared agreement. 2. Objectification. When creation becomes reality. The second process is objectification. Once norms are established, they begin to be perceived as entities independent of their creators. For example, the law seems to exist as a natural given. Social roles seem inevitable. Power structures seem permanent. Collective software turns creation into objective reality. This stage is essential in the human hard and soft theory. Code written by previous generations becomes the environment in which individual software is written. 3. Internalization. Installation of reality in the individual. The third stage is internalization. The child, through socialization, absorbs the norms as fundamental truths. He does not perceive them as conventions but as natural reality. For example, the mother tongue seems the only correct way of expression. Family values seem universal. Moral norms are perceived as absolute. In terms of our model, internalization is the process of installing the cultural operating system. The software takes collective norms and turns them into automatic internal rules. 4. Primary socialization. Deep software writing. Primary socialization takes place in the family and in the first years of life. During this period, the child does not have the critical ability to evaluate norms, accepts the transmitted reality as total. This is the deepest stage of programming. The software doesn't just learn rules, he learns what is normal. A child raised in a violent environment may consider violence a natural part of existence. A child raised in an academic environment may take education for granted. Perceived reality is a function of the programming environment. 5. Language, the main vehicle of construction. Language is the central tool of social construction. Through language, we label experiences. We classify people. We transmit values. We define truth. Internal software is structured by words. If a child is consistently labeled as disabled, the software can install that identity. If it is called brave and capable, the identity will reflect these messages. Language is cultural source code. 6. Institutions, stabilizers of reality. Institutions, school, state, religion, family, function as central servers of collective reality. They reproduce norms, legitimize values, sanctions deviations. Through education and rituals, institutions reinforce the cultural code. The individual soft aligns with the collective soft to ensure social belonging. 7. Legitimization, justification of reality. For social reality to be stable, it must be justified. Myths, religions, ideologies, and scientific theories can function as legitimizing mechanisms. They explain why things are the way they are. In human hard and soft theory, legitimization is the process by which software reinforces the stability of programming. When a norm is morally or religiously justified, it becomes harder to challenge. 8. The pluralism of realities. In a globalized world, individuals are exposed to multiple cultural realities. This can produce internal conflict, identity crises, re-evaluations of values. When two different cultural software come into contact, the individual can begin the process of updating. Reality no longer seems absolute but relative. 9. The reality and illusion of autonomy. A central aspect of the human hard and soft theory is the idea that the individual believes that he creates his life independently, but the value system, moral norms, aspirations, the definition of success are taken from the internalized social reality. Thus, what we perceive as personal choice can be the execution of a collective programming we do not choose completely in a vacuum. We choose within a cultural matrix. 10. The possibility of rewriting reality. If reality is constructed, it can be reconstructed. Social change occurs when enough individual software begins to challenge the existing programming. Cultural revolutions, social movements, educational reforms are processes of collective rewriting on an individual level. Awareness of the fact that norms are constructed offers cognitive freedom. Perceived truth can be analyzed. 11. Implications for human hard and soft theory. The integration of social construction into the model produces a major conclusion: the hard is biological. The soft is written through experience. But the writing environment is a socially constructed reality. Therefore, each individual is the result of a double programming. Biological programming. Cultural programming. Consciousness appears at the intersection of these. Conclusion: reality as collective software. The social construction of reality explains why the world appears stable, coherent, and natural. In reality, norms are created, values are transmitted, identities are formed, truths are legitimized. Human soft internalizes these structures and runs them as reality. Human hard and soft theory states that we do not live in a purely objective universe, but in a system of collectively programmed meanings. The moment we understand that social reality is constructed, a new possibility arises: not only to run the received programming but to consciously participate in its rewriting. And this ability to recognize the constructed nature of reality represents one of the highest forms of cognitive maturity of the human software.